Snowstorm Survival Story. It all began as a simple idea, a day of ice fishing on the frozen expanse of Blackwater Lake. Jeremy and his two closest friends, Matt and Aaron, had been planning this trip for weeks. The weather forecast promised a mild day, and the early morning sky seemed to agree, painted in soft pastels of pink and blue. By the time they arrived at the lake, the sun was just cresting over the treetops, casting long golden shadows across the snow-covered ice. The trio laughed and joked as they set up their gear near the center of the lake, far from the tree line and any disturbances. The ice beneath their boots creaked and groaned, but they brushed it off as normal after all. The lake had been frozen solid for months. As they settled into their routine, drilling holes and baiting lines, the wind began to pick up. At first, it was nothing more than a gentle breeze, but within an hour, it had transformed into an icy gale that cut through their layers of clothing like knives. Clouds rolled in swiftly, dark and ominous, swallowing the once bright sky. "Did anyone check the updated forecast?" Aaron asked, his voice strained against the howling wind. "It said clear all day," Matt replied, though he didn't sound convinced anymore. By noon, the mild day they'd anticipated had turned into a full-blown snowstorm. Visibility was reduced to mere feet, and the wind's shriek drowned out their voices. Snow swirled around them in a relentless fury, erasing their tracks and making the shoreline their only point of reference disappear. "We need to pack up and head back," Jeremy shouted, his voice nearly lost in the storm. The others nodded, their earlier excitement replaced by a growing sense of dread. But as they gathered their gear, something changed. The wind seemed to carry strange, low whispers, barely audible, yet undeniably present. At first, they thought it was their imagination, but the whispers grew louder, weaving through the gale like a sinister melody. The voices spoke in a language none of them could understand, yet they felt an inexplicable chill each time they heard it. "What the hell is that?" Matt asked, his face pale. "It's just the wind," Jeremy said, though his voice betrayed his uncertainty. They trudged through the snow, each step feeling heavier than the last. The ice beneath them creaked louder now, the sound reverberating like thunder. Then, without warning, Aaron's foot broke through the surface. He screamed as icy water engulfed his leg, pulling him down. The others rushed to his aid, grabbing his arms and hauling him back onto solid ice. But the whispers grew louder, almost frantic, as if angered by their escape. "We need to move now," Jeremy commanded. They pressed on, but the storm seemed alive, pushing them in circles. Landmarks they thought they recognized would vanish when they approached, replaced by endless white. Panic set in as they realized they were hopelessly lost. Then, they saw it, a faint light flickering in the distance. It looked like a lantern, swaying gently as though someone was carrying it. "Over there," Aaron yelled. Desperate for salvation, they followed the light. But as they drew closer, the whispers became screams, loud and guttural, echoing all around them. The light began to move faster, darting through the snowstorm like it was leading them deeper into the lake. "Wait!" Jeremy shouted, but the light didn't stop. Against their better judgment, they continued to chase it, their desperation outweighing their fear. Suddenly, the ground beneath them groaned louder than ever. The ice cracked, splitting in jagged lines that spread out like a spider. The light vanished, leaving them in complete darkness save for the dim glow of the storm. A loud, guttural roar erupted from beneath the ice, shaking the frozen surface. Something massive moved below, its shadow visible under the thin ice. The three friends scrambled back, but Aaron slipped and fell. Before they could react, the ice beneath him shattered, and he was gone, dragged into the freezing abyss by an unseen force. Jeremy and Matt screamed his name, but there was no response, only the howling wind and the whispers, now mocking and cruel. They ran, their lungs burning and legs numb, until they finally stumbled onto solid ground. When they reached their car, they didn't stop to speak. They peeled out of the parking lot, the storm still raging behind them. It wasn't until they were miles away that they dared to look back. The snowstorm had vanished, leaving Blackwater Lake eerily calm and silent. Aaron was never found, and the locals refused to speak of what might have happened. Some said the lake was cursed, that it claimed a life every few years. Jeremy and Matt never returned, but they could still hear the whispers in their dreams, calling them back to the echoes of the forgotten. Days turned into weeks, yet the chilling events at the mansion refused to fade from their memories. Adrian, now haunted by nightmares of the eerie painting and the spectral whispers, found himself compulsively sketching the strange woman's face in his notebook. Each time, the expression on the sketch grew more sinister, her eyes seeming to follow him off the page. Emma, too, was unraveling. She began hearing faint laughter in her apartment soft, mocking, and always coming from the shadows. At first, she thought it was her mind playing tricks, but when objects began moving on their own, she knew something unnatural had followed them back. Desperate for answers, the two decided to return to the mansion. This time, they would dig deeper, uncovering whatever dark secrets were buried within its walls. Armed with flashlights, recording equipment, and trembling resolve, they crossed the mansion's threshold once more. The air inside was suffocating, heavier than before. The grand hall was eerily silent, the once faint murmurs now completely absent. It was as though the house itself was holding its breath, waiting. Adrian led Emma to the room with the painting, but when they arrived, the painting was gone. In its place hung an old mirror, its glass cracked and tarnished with age. As Adrian approached it, his reflection seemed to ripple unnaturally. Then, a shadow moved across the mirror, shadow that wasn't theirs. Suddenly, a low, guttural growl echoed through the room. Emma spun around, her flashlight catching a fleeting glimpse of something scuttling across the ceiling. "Did you see that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Adrian nodded, his eyes wide with terror. "We need to find out what this place is hiding," he said, though his voice betrayed his fear. They ventured deeper into the mansion, descending a narrow staircase they hadn't noticed before. The air grew colder with each step, and an overwhelming sense of dread settled over them. At the bottom, they found a hidden cellar. It was lined with shelves filled with jars each containing strange, unidentifiable objects floating in murky liquid. In the center of the room was a stone altar, etched with arcane symbols. Resting on the altar was a leather-bound book, its cover adorned with the same symbols. The book seemed to pulsate, as though alive. Emma hesitated, but Adrian, compelled by an unseen force, reached out and opened it. The pages were filled with strange incantations and sketches, dark rituals meant to summon and bind spirits. One sketch, in particular, caught Emma's eye. It was the woman from the painting, her mouth twisted into a grin of malice. Below it was a single word: the Watcher. Before they could process what they had found, the cellar door slammed shut. The room plunged into darkness, their flashlights flickering. A chilling voice echoed around them, whispering, "You shouldn't have come back." The jars on the shelves began to shatter one by one, releasing a foul stench and an otherworldly wailing. Shadows coalesced into a humanoid form, its eyes glowing with a malevolent light. Emma grabbed Adrian's arm. "We need to leave now," she screamed. They bolted up the stairs, but the staircase seemed endless, twisting and shifting as though the house itself was alive. Behind them, the entity gave chase, its guttural growls growing louder. When they finally burst into the grand hall, the front door was gone. In its place was the painting, now larger and more vivid. The woman in the painting moved, her hand reaching out toward. Adrian turned to Emma, his face pale. "We're not getting out," he whispered. Emma clenched her fists, her fear giving way to determination. "If this house wants to keep us, it's going to have to fight for it." The Watcher's domain. The mansion seemed to pulse around them, alive with a malevolent energy. Emma's words hung in the air as the painting began to bleed darkness, shadows spilling onto the floor like living ink. The woman's painted hand stretched farther, her eyes glowing with a cruel light. "We have to destroy it," Adrian said, his voice cracking. "It's the source." Emma hesitated. "And if it's not? What if destroying it makes things worse?" Before Adrian could respond, the shadows on the floor twisted and formed into clawed hands. One lashed out, narrowly missing Emma's leg. "No time to argue," Adrian shouted, grabbing an ornate candelabra from a nearby table. He swung it at the painting, but as the metal made contact, an ear-piercing scream erupted, knocking both of them to the ground. The mansion shuddered violently, as though protesting their defiance. Walls began to crack, bleeding a thick black ooze that stank of decay. Emma scrambled to her feet, grabbing Adrian by the arm. "We're running out of options." As if in response, the chandelier above them crashed to the floor, narrowly missing them. The woman's voice echoed through the grand hall, low and mocking. "You cannot escape me. You belong to the house now." Desperate, Emma pulled Adrian toward the staircase leading back to the cellar. "The book. It's the only thing that might tell us how to end this." Adrian hesitated, but the growls and screeches of unseen entities spurred him forward. They descended once more into the cellar, now even more grotesque. The jars had regenerated, their contents writhing as though alive. The stone altar emanated a sickly green glow, and the book lay open, its pages flipping on their own. Emma snatched it up, scanning the pages. Her hands trembled as she read aloud. "To banish the Watcher, the mirror must be broken, its shards cleansed by fire." "The mirror," Adrian exclaimed. "The one that replaced the painting upstairs." Before they could move, the cellar door slammed shut again. The glow from the altar intensified, and the shadows in the room began to converge into a towering figure. It was the Watcher herself, her ethereal form flickering between solid and vapor. "You dare defy me?" Her voice boomed, rattling the walls. Emma clenched the book tightly. "We'll do more than defy you," she spat, summoning a courage she didn't feel. The Watcher lunged, her clawed hand swiping at them. Adrian shoved Emma aside, narrowly avoiding the attack. He grabbed a jar from the shelf and hurled it at the entity. It shattered, releasing a burst of acrid smoke that momentarily distorted the Watcher's form. "Go!" Adrian shouted. "Get to the mirror!" Emma hesitated, fear and determination battling within her. "Not without you." The Watcher roared, her form stabilizing, and began advancing. Adrian grabbed another jar, buying them a few more seconds. "Just go!" Emma turned and bolted up the stairs. The house fought her every step. Corridors twisted, doors appeared where there were none, and the very air seemed to thicken. She finally reached the grand hall, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The mirror stood where the painting had been, its surface rippling like water. Emma grabbed a nearby chair and hurled it at the mirror. The glass cracked but didn't shatter. "No, no, no!" she screamed, picking up a heavy vase and smashing it into the mirror. This time, the glass shattered into dozens of jagged shards. A deafening shriek filled the air as the house quaked violently. The shadows recoiled, writhing as though in agony. Adrian stumbled into the hall, his face pale and bleeding from a gash on his forehead. "The shards!" he gasped. "We need fire!" Emma looked around frantically. Her eyes landed on the toppled candelabra, its candles still flickering weakly. She grabbed one and began setting the shards alight. Each shard ignited with a green flame, and the screams of the Watcher grew fainter. As the final shard burned, the house began to collapse, the walls crumbling into nothingness. Adrian and Emma ran for their lives, bursting through the front door just as the mansion imploded, leaving nothing but an eerie silence and a patch of scorched earth. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Adrian broke the silence. "Is it over?" Emma shook her head, staring at the book still clutched in her hands. "I don't think so," she whispered, flipping to the last page. Scrawled in blood-red ink were the words, "The Watcher is never truly gone. The Watcher's return." Adrian and Emma didn't speak on the drive back to their motel. The oppressive silence felt heavier than the destruction they'd just escaped. Emma kept the book clutched tightly to her chest, her eyes darting nervously to its cover as if it might spring to life. They parked under the flickering neon sign of the decrepit roadside inn. The shadows in the parking lot seemed darker than before, and the chill in the air gnawed at their bones. Inside their room, Emma placed the book on the bed, staring at it like it might explode. "We should burn it," she said softly. Adrian nodded but hesitated. "What if that makes things worse? We thought destroying the mirror ended it, but the book." A loud knock at the door interrupted him. They froze, exchanging uneasy glances. "Who could it be at this hour?" Adrian whispered, creeping toward the peephole. He squinted, but no one was there. Another knock followed, louder and more insistent. Emma grabbed his arm. "Don't open it." Suddenly, the knock turned into a deafening pounding, as though someone or something was trying to break down the door. The lights in the room flickered violently, and an icy wind swept through, extinguishing the warmth. Adrian backed away. "It's her. She's not done with us." The pounding stopped, replaced by a low, guttural whisper coming from the other side of the door. "Let me in." Emma screamed as the voice shifted to mimic her own. "Adrian, it's me. Please, open the door." Adrian shook his head, backing further into the room. "It's a trick. She's trying to break us." The window shattered suddenly, the shards flying inward like daggers. A thick black mist poured through the opening, filling the room with a suffocating darkness. The mist coalesced into a familiar form, the Watcher, her glowing eyes burning with fury. "You thought you could escape," she hissed, her voice reverberating in their skulls. Adrian grabbed Emma's arm, yanking her toward the bathroom.
"We need to get out of here."
But as they crossed the threshold, the walls of the motel room began to warp. The bathroom melted away, replaced by the cellar of the mansion they'd just destroyed. "No!" Emma screamed. "This can't be real. We destroyed it." The Watcher's laugh echoed around them, deep and cruel. "You burned my vessel, but my curse binds you still." Adrian spun around, searching for anything they could use. The altar stood at the center of the room, pulsing with green light. The book was there too, now open to a page they hadn't seen before. Emma read it aloud in a trembling voice. "The cursed must sacrifice what they hold most dear to sever the Watcher's claim." Adrian's heart sank. "What does that mean? What do we have to sacrifice?" Before Emma could answer, the Watcher surged toward them, her claws outstretched. Adrian grabbed a nearby chain and swung it, the metal passing harmlessly through her smoky form. She laughed, the sound chilling and unrelenting. "You cannot fight me. Choose your sacrifice, or I will consume you." Emma stared at the book, her mind racing. "It's not just a life," she whispered. "It's something deeper, something personal. Our bond." Adrian turned to her, horrified. "What are you saying?" Emma's voice broke as tears streamed down her face. "She's feeding on us, on our connection. If we let her, she'll take every—" Adrian's grip tightened on her hand. "We've come this far. We're not giving up." The Watcher roared, her form expanding to fill the entire cellar. Shadows lashed out, wrapping around Adrian's arms and legs, dragging him toward the altar. He fought desperately, but the force was too strong. "Adrian!" Emma screamed, rushing to. The book glowed brighter, and Emma realized what she had to do. She tore the page out and slammed it onto the altar, then grabbed the ceremonial dagger lying nearby. "Emma, no!" Adrian cried. With a shaking hand, she cut into her palm, letting her blood drip onto the page. The Watcher froze, her form flickered. Emma looked at Adrian, her voice trembling. "It's the only way. If I give her everything I hold dear." Adrian's eyes widened in realization. "No. We'll find another way." But Emma shook her head, tears falling freely. "This is the only way to end it. For you to live." The Watcher lunged, but Emma slammed the dagger into the page, her blood soaking through the parchment. A deafening scream erupted as the cellar erupted in light. Adrian was thrown backward, his vision blurring. The last thing he saw was Emma standing defiantly at the altar, the Watcher's form disintegrating into nothing. When he woke, he was lying in the parking lot of the motel. The book was gone, the motel was silent, and the night air was still. "Emma?" he called weakly, his voice breaking. But there was no response. The motel's neon sign flickered, and for a moment, Adrian swore he saw Emma's silhouette in the glass. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. And then she was gone. The curse lives on. Adrian sat on the asphalt of the empty motel parking lot, his heart hollow and his mind reeling. The air was eerily still, yet the silence screamed with the absence of Emma. The faint echo of her silhouette in the motel window was etched into his mind. As he stumbled to his feet, the world felt off. The colors were muted, the edges of reality blurred. It was as if the Watcher's curse hadn't left it had shifted, burrowed into him like a parasite. He stepped back into the motel room, now devoid of its earlier chaos. The shattered window was intact, the furniture pristine. On the bed lay Emma's necklacea simple locket she always wore, now cold and lifeless. He clutched it tightly, his knuckles whitening. "Emma," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I'll find you, I swear." The shadows deepen. Adrian left the motel the next morning, determined to retrace their steps for answers. Every town, every clue, felt like a breadcrumb leading him deeper into the curse's grasp. Locals avoided him, their eyes darting away as if they sensed the darkness trailing him. The first real sign came in the form of a dream, or perhaps it was a vision. That night, as he slept in his car on an abandoned road, he heard Emma's voice, "Adrian." It was faint, distorted, like a whisper carried on the wind. He opened his eyes, and there she was, standing at the edge of the road, her figure bathed in moonlight. "Emma!" He scrambled out of the car and ran toward her, but as he reached out, her form flickered, twisting into the Watcher's grotesque visage. "You'll never escape me," the Watcher hissed, her glowing eyes boring into his soul. Adrian woke with a start, drenched in sweat. His car windows were fogged, and in the condensation, a single word was scrawled: "Closer." The Forbidden Town. Adrian's search eventually led him to a forgotten town, one that wasn't on any map. The air here was heavy, oppressive, as if the place itself were cursed. At the center of the town stood a crumbling church, its spire bent and twisted like a crooked finger pointing to the heavens. Inside, the air was frigid. Dust hung in the dim light filtering through shattered stained glass. The altar was covered in symbols he recognized from the book, the same ones that had haunted him and Emma. At the far end of the room was a mirror, large and ornate, its surface dull and scratched. Adrian approached cautiously, his breath visible in the icy air. As he peered into the mirror, he saw Emma not as she was, but distorted, trapped in a realm of shadows. Her eyes pleaded with him, her lips moving silently. "Emma," Adrian whispered, pressing his hand to the cold glass. A voice echoed through the church, low and guttural. "She belongs to me now." The Watcher materialized in the mirror, her grin wide and sinister. "You think you can save her? Your bond may be strong, but it won't be enough to sever my claim." Adrian clenched his fists. "What do you want from me?" Her laughter was sharp, cutting. "Your soul or hers? Choose, Adrian. Time is running out." A desperate gamble. Adrian fell to his knees, his mind racing. He had to find a way to outsmart the Watcher, to break the curse without sacrificing Emma or himself. His eyes landed on an old tome resting on the altar, its cover embossed with the same sigils as the book they'd found in the mansion. Flipping through the brittle pages, he found a passage about the Watcher's Originsa, malevolent spirit, bound to feed on bonds of love and trust to sustain her power. To weaken her, one had to sever her connection to the mortal realm entirely. But the ritual required a high price, a willing participant to take her place as the new Watcher. Adrian's chest tightened. Could he do it? Could he damn himself to save? The mirror pulsed, drawing his attention. Emma's face reappeared, her expression one of anguish. "Adrian." Her voice was faint, but it was enough to steal his "I won't lose you," he whispered. The final stand. Adrian prepared the ritual, gathering the items listed in the tome. A piece of himself, a strand of hair, a token of Emma's, her lock, and a relic tied to the Watcher, a shard of glass from the mirror. As he chanted the incantation, the church trembled. The mirror cracked further, the Watcher's scream piercing the air. Shadows erupted from the glass, swirling around Adrian like a "You dare challenge me?" she roared. Adrian pressed on, his voice rising above hers. The locket glowed in his hand, and for a brief moment, Emma's face appeared beside him, her presence giving him strength. The Watcher lunged at him, her claws outstretched, but Adrian thrust the glowing locket toward her. The light consumed her, and the shadows began to dissipate. The mirror shattered completely, and the church fell silent. Aftermath. When Adrian opened his eyes, he was lying in a field under the morning sun. The church was gone, and so was the mirror. Beside him lay the locket, now warm to the touch. He opened it to find a picture of Emma smiling, something it had never held before. But Emma was still gone. The Watcher's curse had been broken, but at what cost? As Adrian stood, he felt a shadow lingering within him, a cold reminder that the darkness wasn't entirely gone. From the corner of his eye, he caught a flicker of movement, a figure watching him from the tree line. It looked like Emma, but when he turned, the figure vanished. The curse had changed, but it wasn't over. Adrian knew one thing for certain: the fight wasn't finished.